Hello and welcome. I'm Ijoma Onyato. Tonight, National Assembly Joint Committee on INEC concludes sitting on 2019 election budget proposal to submit report to Appropriation Committee for further action. All Progressives Congress insists National Assembly must reconvene immediately to discuss passage of 2019 election budget as main opposition party PDP blames ruling party for the impasse. Detained journalist Samuel Ogundekwe regains freedom 3 days after he was arrested for alleged possession of classified documents. And death toll from India flooding doubles in Kerala, with more than 320 people feared killed.
On Business News Tonight, NNPC agrees to list 40% of its shares on the Nigerian Stock Exchange as it awaits President's approval for Petroleum Industry Governance Bill.
And on Sports News Tonight, FIFA rejects a proposed meeting with the Nigeria Sports Minister Solomon Dalong to discuss the crisis rocking the Football Federation, citing discrepancies in the composition of the delegates list.
And from Abuja, Acting President Yemi Osinbajo visits scene of Abuja building collapse, where rescue officials have been battling to save those trapped.
We begin tonight with the resolution by the Joint Committee of the National Assembly on INEC to consider the budget for the Independent National Electoral Commission before it's sent to appropriation committees of both chambers. The resolution was reached after a second meeting between the committee and the electoral body, with the Minister of Budget and National Planning and the Special Assistant to the President on National Assembly matters in attendance. The Appropriations Committee is expected to scrutinize and decide the source of funding for INEC's budget. Our correspondent Terry Ikumi reports.
It's the second meeting in 2 days between the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) and the National Assembly Joint Committee on INEC.
Our duties are responsible.
Following an inconclusive meeting on the first day, the Minister of Budget and National Planning has been invited to clarify certain disparities in the letter presented by President Muhammadu Buhari and that of INEC.
When Mr. President considered the funding constraints, we now try, the budget office now looked through that budget and said, okay, are there aspects of this budget which they are not actually going to spend in 2018, which they are going to spend in 2019, between January and February 2019? And those elements were put for the 2019 budget.
Another bone of contention is why a part of the supplementary budget has to be moved to the 2019 budget.
We would have no objection whatsoever to your appropriating the full amount, the 189 billion, so that you don't have to now reconsider this for the 2019 budget. That would mean that we would not include the 45 billion in the 2019 budget, which we are preparing now.
The issue is how much of it is coming out of supplementary appropriation in 2018 and how much of it is going to be taken in 2019. But this is not a matter for INEC. How the money is sourced is a matter between the National Assembly and the Executive.
Lawmakers are still torn between the source of funding, prompting the committee chairpersons to step in.
That document of the schedule is not for us. It is for the Appropriation Committee. Our concern, as we have earlier said, is the INEC budget. And we can tell Mr. President that we want the entire amount of money to be sourced from the 2018 budget.
We will decide which one we want to use. Are we going to go by 143 or we're going to go by 189? It is our prerogative as a committee to decide that.
The committee resolves to deliberate on the budget and recommend it to the Appropriations Committee of both chambers to determine the source of funding. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the INEC chairman, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, is insisting that the 2019 election date remains fixed and will not be shifted. He explains that there are conditions in the Electoral Act which provide for the postponement of the elections, or there are no conditions. I beg your pardon.
I've said this over and over again. There are no conditions under which elections will be postponed under Section 26 of the Electoral Act. The date is firm and fixed, February 16th, 2019. We issued the timetable well in advance. For the very first time in the history of our elections, citizens of Nigeria know when elections will take place 1 year in advance. I've heard this said that we have earmarked budget for international observers. There is no such a thing. There is no line in the budget for international observers. What we have provided for are the kits, the jackets, the face scarf, the publications, the ID cards that we give international observers, the stickers that they affix to their cars to be identified on election day. This is the standard practice. Each country that conducts or organizes election provides this kind of facilities for those who observe elections. But their accommodation, transportation, all expenditure will be borne by different election observation teams, not by the Nigerian government. So we have no provision in the budget for election observation. May I also seize this opportunity to make this clarification? Somebody said that we made provision for this 6 billion for the feeding of policemen. Look at the budget line by line. There is no such provision. There is no 6 million for the feeding of policemen. What we have done is a provision for 4.6 million for supplementary allowance of 1,000 naira per head for election personnel at the polling unit on election day, which will include all security personnel. And this is nothing new. It has been part of the Commission's budget since 2007. So INEC has been doing that consistently for the last 11 years. But we now know the details of the budget and we're asking questions simply because, as I said earlier, this is the first time the budget is made public, even before it is appropriated.
The All Progressives Congress is insisting that the National Assembly must reconvene immediately to consider at plenary the 2019 election budget of the Independent National Electoral Commission. In a statement, the APC accuses the People's Democratic Party of attempting to hide under the yet-to-be-assented Electoral Act Amendment Bill to draw attention away from the alleged refusal of the Senate President to reconvene the National Assembly. The party adds, quote, "The sanctity of our electoral system is being threatened by this orchestrated sabotage and deliberate attempt to weaken INEC as we prepare for the general elections in 2019, end of quote. The APC says the PDP is having sleepless nights, having realized that if the election is held today, the APC will win by a landslide, judging by the achievements recorded by the President Buhari administration. Meanwhile, the People's Democratic Party believes the ruling All Progressives Congress is twisting the facts of their alleged culpability in the impasse at the National Assembly. A statement by the party's spokesperson, Mr. Kola Ologbodion, says, quote, "Nigerians are already aware of how the APC has been allegedly frustrating the National Assembly by creating hitches, illegal impeachment processes, physical blockage of the National Assembly, and besieging of the official residence of the Senate President, Dr. Bukola Saraki, and his deputy, Ike Ekweremadu, respectively," end of quote. Mr. Ologbodion insists that the PDP had raised the flag and pointed out that bringing the budget in July, at a time the National Assembly was already going on annual vacation, was rather late, and asking that the fund be wired from constituency project funds was sinking the INEC budget and the entire 2019 electoral process into a needless controversy. To other matters now, a journalist with one of Nigeria's online news agencies, Premium Times, Samuel Ogundikwe, has been released from police custody. Mr. Ogundikwe, who was detained on Tuesday, regained his freedom this morning after he was granted bail by Magistrate Abdul Wahab Mohammed of the Kubwa Grade 1 Magistrate Court in Abuja. The magistrate had first heard the case on Wednesday after Mr. Ogundikwe was allegedly arraigned without legal representation, where the court granted a request by the police that the journalist be detained for 5 days until August the 20th. The court, however, granted him bail today in the sum of 500,000 naira and a surety who must be resident within the court's jurisdiction. The police had accused Mr. Ogundikwe of being in possession of classified documents capable of causing a breach of national security and a breakdown of law and order. But counsel to Premium Times, Mr. Jiti Ogunye, disagrees, claiming that Mr. Ogundikwe was detained for refusing to disclose his source for a story. Mr. Ogundipe's detention has been condemned by Nigerians, local and international rights groups, including Amnesty International and Committee to Protect Journalists. To another case involving a gentleman of the press, the Magistrates Court sitting in Wuse 2 in the Federal Capital Territory has adjourned the trial of journalist Jones Abiri until September the 5th. This follows the absence of the prosecutor and defense counsel when the case was called in court today. The publisher of the weekly Source magazine was released on bail on Wednesday after spending 2 years in the custody of the Department of State Services. He's accused of having links to armed military in the Niger Delta and fraudulently attempting to collect money from multinational oil companies in Nigeria. Before adjourning the trial until today, the court had yesterday, August the 16th, ordered the counsel to the DSS to serve their proof of evidence in the case against him or have the case struck out.
The court ordered that the State Security Service should serve us with the proof of evidence, and this morning they came to court with the proof of evidence and served on us. So we're entitled to have a look at it and then respond accordingly. So the matter has now been adjourned to the 5th of September for trial.
The Chinese ambassador to Nigeria, Mr. Xu Jinping, has announced closer bilateral ties with Nigeria in agriculture, manufacturing and industrial sectors. And that's according to him, and he will develop the economy of both countries to ensure technology transfer and create jobs. The Chinese ambassador was speaking at a China-Nigeria meeting in Abuja.
As the largest developing country in the world, China takes deep pride in its ever stronger partnership with Nigeria, the largest developing country in Africa. It is our firm belief that the China-Nigeria cooperation is broadly South-to-South cooperation between two equals and is indeed mutually beneficial. China remains committed to stepping up its cooperation with Nigeria in agriculture, manufacturing, industrial capacity and investment, infrastructure, energy, culture, and people-to-people exchanges, and all other areas. 5 years ago, President Xi proposed the initiative of building the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. The Belt and Road Initiative is open to all countries. Though originating from China, it belongs to the whole world. Africa, being part of the historical and natural extension of the Belt and Road, has been an important participant in this initiative. The cooperation between China and Africa under the Belt and Road Initiative will generate more resources and means, expand the market and space for African development, and broaden its development prospects.
The $2.5 billion swap deal between Nigeria and China is aimed at protecting local and international manufacturers from the harsh effects of third currency fluctuations. The agreement has seen just 2 seasons of interventions from the Central Bank of Nigeria as entrepreneurs wonder about the effectiveness of the policy. Channel's business correspondent Temple Ashaju reports.
Nigeria and China's $2.5 billion or 16 billion yuan currency swap agreement was signed in April after a painstaking 2 years of negotiation. The deal, which aims to boost commercial ties and reduce the need for US dollars in bilateral trade, was officially concluded between the Central Bank of Nigeria and the People's Bank of China in Beijing. At the Monetary Policy Committee meeting in May, CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele announced plans for the takeoff.
There are only 3 countries in Africa that currently enjoy the swap deal between China and themselves: South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria. So there's a lot of scope to grow trade. There's a lot of scope for Nigeria to benefit from this arrangement, and particularly not just in Nigeria, but also in the West African sub-region.
The deal is dedicated to the payments of yuan-denominated letters of credit, settled through a multiple price book building process and cut off at a marginal rate. 2 months afterwards, the CBN flagged off secondary market intervention sales in Chinese yuan at a 50 kobo spread. Since the takeoff on July the 27th, 2018, about 140 million yuan has been traded in the spot and short-tenured forwards markets.
I tried to buy and before now, and we couldn't. It was just a policy thing. I'm not sure. I've not seen anybody who has done it. So we had to send dollars. That's what we sent for the thing we wanted to buy.
There wasn't total awareness. Some people haven't registered their FOMEMs yet, which is what will first qualify you to participate. But I'm sure that now that the first one has happened, everybody believes, and people are rushing, people importing from China are rushing to register their FOMEMs.
The ultimate gain of the swap agreement is the provision of naira liquidity. But Nigerians wonder if this objective has met the need of domestic businesses. Temple Ashaju, Channels Television News.
In part 2, after the break, we'll examine the pros and cons of the currency swap between Nigeria and China, and the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Muda Yusuf, joins me. Please stay with us.